Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kramer. Our guest today is Darryl Stickel. I want to welcome you to the show, Darryl. I know we're going to have a great conversation. Let's start by talking a little bit about your business.
Sure. So I have a little company called Trust Unlimited, and the focus is on helping people understand what trust is, how it works, and most importantly, how to build it. And so we work with a really broad range of organizations and individuals, helping them figure out how to improve their relationships.
We all know that trust is an essential in life and in business. A lot of people are very guarded. A lot of us are not particularly trusting of others, and we have all sorts of reasons why. So when we bring up the subject of trust, immediately it's going to start firing off those warning bells for people. And it's like, oh, maybe I could trust a little bit more, but it's not safe to trust too much. And then the mind has that tendency to be sort of black and white, all or nothing, as though somehow it means if I surrender all of my doubt and all of this mistrust that I have towards employees or colleagues or vendors or my spouse or my kids or whatever, that means that I'm going to just be an idiot, a vulnerable idiot, and everybody's going to take advantage of me and I'm just going to get screwed. So let's start there. Let's start by talking about, let's just throw it right out there and get right into it. Right?
Well, that's so some really great points you raised. One is that sort of black and white notion, right? For a lot of us, and for the research and most of the trust literature, they treat trust like a dichotomous variable, like we either trust people or we don't, right? And the reality is we trust people all the time. We just trust some people more than others. And so the goal that I have is helping people close the gap between how much they should be trusted and how much they actually are. And you put your finger on a really good point there, which is that trust levels are at some of the lowest we've ever seen. And people are uncomfortable. And I believe that part of that stems from the fact that trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. When we're deciding whether to trust someone, we ask ourselves, how likely am I to be harmed, which is perceived uncertainty. And if I'm harmed, how bad is it going to hurt? That's the second question. And so it's uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. And we each have a threshold of risk that we're comfortable with. And so if our perception of the risk goes beyond our threshold, we don't trust. If it's beneath it, then we do. If we think about what's been going on for the last decade, our vulnerability sure hasn't gone down, but our uncertainty is bouncing all over the place. And that makes it incredibly hard for us to trust people more than we already do. And what we need is to understand how trust works so we can make informed decisions, so that we can actually communicate with each other more effectively, be more intentional, and so that I can communicate to you better that it's okay to trust me when it really is. And I can be careful about telling you, hey, maybe not right now, when it isn't. And we face a bunch of challenges right now. One of them is this profound uncertainty. Another is our lack of awareness about who we trust and how much we trust them. And our own self-awareness. So I'm legally blind. You shouldn't trust me to paint your house, right? There's a bunch of things that I should not do, right? And so the more I'm able to communicate that to you, the more you're able to understand, okay, well, within these other domains, it's okay to trust Darryl, but not in these other places. And so I think right now we need to be more intentional and thoughtful than we've ever been about who we trust and how much we trust them.
There are times when it's obvious to us that not trusting is a problem. If it's creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, it's an obvious problem. But a lot of people probably aren't quite at that level. And so they may be asking themselves, well, why should I trust? Isn't it safer not to trust? There's that sort of self-defense mechanism that
Right.
goes hand in hand with this whole thing around trust. And a lot of people, especially if they feel like they have been vulnerable in the past and it hasn't worked out so well for them, or for the sake of their survival or security, they need to
Hmm.
be on guard. I'd like to speak a little bit on the topic of why it's beneficial to challenge some of those old conceptions about protecting ourselves by not trusting, and how in some circumstances it's doing more harm than good.
Wow. Okay. So again, a very interesting perspective, right? You're taking the perspective of the truster rather than the person trying to be trusted. And so we know from research and from experience that trust acts as a social lubricant. It makes life easier. And if I think about it from a parent perspective, um, I'm never more vulnerable than when it comes to my kids. And we go back to that uncertainty times vulnerability paradigm. When they're young, I'm around them all the time. So my uncertainty is fairly low. And I manage that by not letting them go to strangers or go to people I don't know. And I check things out. And as they get older, they become a little more independent. And so my uncertainty may start to rise. And my perceptions of vulnerability probably aren't shrinking, right? Because now I'm attached. I've had them for a while. And so we can start to engage in micromanagement, right? We can start to really become controlling, to reduce our own uncertainty, to manage our own fear. But what that does is it creates a difficult situation for that relationship, because eventually those kids need to break free and become independent human beings. And the tighter I hold on, the harder they have to fight. So that when they break free, it creates a huge rift in that relationship. Whereas if I'm able to build a trusting relationship, then they're able to naturally grow and transition. And we can be part of that entire relationship without feeling like they're stifled or controlled. Imagine the worst case scenario is I tightly hold on to my child, I control them fiercely, and they never break free. I've now created somebody who's either completely dependent on me or set up really well to be controlled by whoever comes along next. And so I've crippled that person. And so in that instance, I need to find ways to reduce my uncertainty that don't harm the other person. So with my sons, I explained to them, I'm never more vulnerable than when it comes to you. And so I can't tolerate a lot of uncertainty. I need to know what's going on. And so they come and talk to me. And they tell me things I never would have told my parents. And we have conversations that are rich and deep and meaningful about the things that really matter in their lives. And they're 21 and 18 now. And we still talk about everything that goes on for them. And so I was able to come alongside as a coach and a parent and a support, and allow them to make mistakes and believe in them that they were going to learn from those mistakes and evolve into the amazing human beings that they're becoming. So let's shift to a different relationship now. And I'm a manager, or I'm a leader, and I am afraid of mistakes. I'm afraid of being wrong, afraid of being vulnerable. And so I micromanage the hell out of all my employees. And they do exactly what I tell them to, but nothing more. And all the research tells us that my unit is going to massively underperform, and that my people are going to be disengaged, frustrated, averse to taking risks, extremely conservative. All the things that would drive success for me are missing. And so if I want to be successful, the more senior I become, the less direct control I have over outcomes. And the more important my ability to build relationships with others becomes, because all of my goals and objectives are met through the actions of other people. And so if I don't find a way to trust them, to build strong relationships, to believe in them, to create an environment where they're able to learn, grow, adapt, develop, then I lose. And so that's the downside risk that we face.
So these are some really great examples and very relatable examples. And a piece here that you just so eloquently weaved in at the end without actually saying it, but really demonstrating it with your examples, is that this is a top down, if you will, issue. And we know this in a lot of different contexts, but you have sort of summarized right, this prevalent issue with management and leadership, and with all of our entrepreneurs who are listening, who are managing their teams, whether it is a very small team, like perhaps just a couple of virtual assistants, or it is a large team where they are operating perhaps as the CEO, and then they have managers underneath them in a variety of different departments. That unhealed, unresolved trust issue within the individual is going to have a negative effect in their business.
Yeah.
So then you mentioned you have to find ways. Now, one of the things that I think is challenging for us is we're so inundated with information. We know so much, but we don't really know how. We don't know what to do. We know what we're supposed to do.
Right.
But we don't know how to do it, especially when it is already programmed into us subconsciously, mentally, emotionally. We're conditioned to be a certain way. We just default to it.
Right.
So you're the expert on this subject. You help people who have these particular challenges. And of course, I know, we'll talk a little bit about the book.
Right.
Talk a little bit about, your business. Obviously, we can't within such a short period of time do the full, course and give them the college credits on the subject, but
right. Right.
Maybe we could start with a couple of tips that are really, really practical to start implementing in day-to-day life.
Right. So I think that's a great idea. And I'd love to leave your audience with some things that they can try. And so part of this is, I believe there are 10 levers we can pull to build trust with others. I talked about the uncertainty and the vulnerability piece, and that leads to perceived risk. And if we want to build trust, then we need to understand, where does uncertainty come from and how do we take steps to reduce it? And where does vulnerability come from and how do we take steps to manage that? And so uncertainty tends to come from two places. It comes from us as individuals, and it comes from the context that we're embedded in, the rules of the game that dictate our behavior. And so the clearer we can make the context to folks, the more they're able to understand how we're constrained, the easier it is for them to predict us and our actions. And that's a way to reduce uncertainty. If we think about the individual piece, there are three levers within there. There's benevolence, integrity, and ability. And those are the three levers that drive perceptions that I'm trustworthy. Now, we all have the ability to build trust. Some are just better than others. And we all have the ability to get better. And so those who aren't great at building trust have a lever that they pull. Usually it's the ability lever. I have these kinds of credentials, this sort of background, this much experience, yada, yada. Those who are better have multiple levers. Those who are really good have multiple levers, and they understand when to pull which one. It's like improving your batting average. And a lot of times people ask me, how do I even start? Right? And so trust is the willingness to be vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. And as a leader, I could start by making myself a little bit vulnerable to initiate a norm of reciprocity with others, to get them to engage. And I could start that by admitting that I'm not perfect. And so for me, the first step is acknowledge your imperfections. And that would look something like, what makes a great leader today is not the same thing that made a great leader 10 years ago. And it's not the same thing that will make an exceptional leader a year or 2 years from now. My role is going to evolve and change. And I'm going to have to learn new skills. And I'm going to stumble and I'm going to fall. And my expectation is that when I do, you'll be there, helping to dust me off. And that we'll learn together from those mistakes. And that I will have exactly the same response when you stumble and fall, learning new skills and habits. And so that's a way to say, I'm not perfect. I don't expect to be perfect. I'm role modeling for you that it's okay for us to learn and grow and develop. One of the biggest challenges I'm seeing with leaders is letting go of the things that got them where they are and made them good enough to get there, but aren't the same things that are going to make them exceptional in that new role. And so letting go of some of that stuff that's stable and feels safe and stepping into some of those new responsibilities where we're going to make mistakes. And it's okay. And in fact, we need to communicate to everyone, I'm not perfect. I don't expect you to be. We're all going to evolve and grow because things are changing so fast. Perfection is a moving target. And it's a flawed strategy to try to pursue it. We just want to keep trying to get better. And so that's one of the steps that I would suggest for folks. Another is to think about.
That's a great one. I just want to make sure that people really actually take that in, because we're talking about breaking down some internal barriers here as well, which is not just so that your employee trusts you more, or your son or your daughter or whoever, right? This is you beginning to trust yourself more too, because so many people are setting this unrealistic expectation for themselves, that because I'm the boss, because I'm the owner, because I'm the CEO, because I'm the this, the that, whatever, I'm not allowed to make a mistake. And it's just simply not true. It's an unrealistic objective.
Imagine how welcoming it would be to turn to your employees and say, this is the thing I'm struggling with right now. And I don't have the answer yet. Full stop. Right? So I'm struggling with how to be a great leader, or I'm struggling with what exceptional looks like for us a year from now or 3 years from now. And I don't have the answer yet. And that's okay. So instead of always coming with, this is the way we're going, this is the answer, I'm perfect, I know everything, instead opening that door to, if you've got some ideas, I'd love to hear them. That creates a completely different relationship and engagement from your staff. So that's one of the approaches that I suggest. Another is thinking about these other levers and actually having conversations. And so imagine you and I are having a conversation, and I've just heard the podcast, and I say, I heard this guy Darryl, he was talking about trust, and he said benevolence is one of these things. And it seems like a big word, but it means having someone's best interest at heart. I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that? And 99% of the time, people will respond with, yeah, I have. Right? I tried to do something for someone and they mistook it for something else, or they didn't interpret it, or they just ignored it. And then I start to narrow the funnel and I say, have you ever had somebody really have your back, like really feel like they were on your side? I have. And then they start to talk about that experience. Well, what did they do? What did they say? How did it feel? Now you're getting hints. Then I narrow the funnel further and I say, What does success look like for you? How do I help you get there? What would it look like if I was benevolent to you? And now we've created transparency. So the next time I'm going to engage in an activity I think is in your interest, I can say, but remember that conversation we had? You told me this is what your success looked like for you. This is me trying to help you get there. That's how we pull that lever.
So these are the types of things that you cover in your book, correct?
It is. I really try to make it practical and applied. So many people talking about trust and how important it is, but so few talking about what we can actually do about it. And so I really try to leave people with things that they can walk away the next day and do, conversations they can have. That's in the book. It's in the masterclass. It's in the coaching that I do and the courses that we deliver with Trust Unlimited.
How can our listeners find the book, purchase the book, learn about the masterclass, learn about you? Can you share with our listeners all of those different ways or the one single way that they can connect with you?
Yeah, so go to trustunlimited.com, and you'll find there's a link to the book. The book can be bought online anywhere, so Amazon or anywhere you buy electronic books. It's available as an audiobook on Audible. The masterclass is at the website, trustunlimited.com. You can reach out to me, Darryl at trustunlimited.com, and connect if you have questions. Happy to try to be helpful.
I have one more question for you, Darryl, before you go for today. And this is about you being vulnerable as the business owner, as the entrepreneur on your own journey. I love to get a little bit into this deep subject of our own mindset challenges that we've actively been working through and overcoming to get to our own levels of success in life and business. And I'd love to find out if there's perhaps one challenge that you would be willing to share with us that you've worked through and overcome to help you get to where you are today.
Yeah, so I think a lot about, we interpret the world through stories. And I can tell a profoundly negative story about myself. There's been a lot of trauma in my life and challenges. Or I can tell a profoundly positive story. And for me, each day is about choosing that positive narrative and focusing on it. I was injured in a car accident in 2001, ended up with post-concussion syndrome, and I still struggle with fatigue. And so it's an ongoing battle to make sure that I keep a positive mindset to try to have the impact in the world that I want to have.
And you're doing it.
I'm
So
sure
a lot of people use their challenges as a very justifiable excuse to give up, to just accept their unfortunate fate, if you will, to be angry at the world, to be resentful and bitter. And some people say, no, I'm not going to do that. And that doesn't mean that making that decision turns everything into rainbows and butterflies. It's a decision we have to keep making all the time. But those who do it have some of the most positive, meaningful impact on other people's lives. And we really can take, no matter what our adversities and challenges are, and we can thrive in spite of them.
We can. And I like to say that a hard road's a good teacher if we're willing to learn. And one of my favorite quotes is by Jack Dempsey, who said, "A champion is someone who gets back up when they can't."
That's a powerful, powerful way to end this episode. I want to thank you so much, Darryl, for being with us. You've really shared some incredible insights and practical tips that people can implement to start to build trust with their team, perhaps with their family, certainly a little bit of self-trust as well.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And of course, I've got to thank all of our listeners. You know, we're doing this for you. If you haven't already subscribed, please make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.